When I did a composition guide for Classic WoW, I got a lot of comments. A lot of them got actually mad at me, like it's my freaking fault that the class design in this game is so dumb that you need 20 warriors on it. I am the last person to be happy that we need 20 warriors in a raid. I am a warrior, they take my gear. But a more productive and honestly a worth talking about comment is something about this. Medina, if a hunter can do 80% of the damage of a warrior in tier 1, right? Why is it such a big deal to take a hunter instead of a warrior? Shouldn't it be just a tiny amount of damage that you lose? And I get it, how could 20% of one of the DPSers in the raid matter? Well, today I wanna show you the math of why stacking warriors is always, no question, gonna beat anything else. And by that I mean they are gonna beat them by a lot. Now, to understand the warrior problem, you gotta look at what a normal composition looks like. This is your meta composition. Actually, I lied, it is not. This is the optimal raid composition your top of the line parser guilds and your top of the line speedrunning guilds are gonna take. Look at this. Who in their right mind would take 25 freaking warriors into a raid? Not to mention those rogues in there, I just put them because I felt like it. You can take a warrior, the rogue is almost as good as a warrior, but the rogue is not as good. And that's a big distinction, you're gonna see why in a minute. And you're gonna ask me questions like, what about Curse of Elements? You only have one warlock. They also got rid of the debuff limit, so doesn't that make warlocks better or boomkins better or whatever? And yes, they should make them a little better, and it doesn't matter. Look at it this way, I am gonna make the numbers deadly simple, because just like you, I started having a lot of problems with math as soon as they put too many zeros on the numbers. So we're gonna make a new unit, a new measurement. Imagine that we measure the damage of a raid by the equivalent of the damage of a warrior. We can call this the warrior index. If a hunter can do 80% of the damage of a warrior, that hunter is 0.8 warriors, right? It makes sense. If a warlock can do 60% of the damage of a warrior, that is 0.6 warriors. And if we know the equivalence between any class and a warrior, we can actually add up the proportion of the damage on the raid. A Fury Prot warrior does 60% of a warrior's worth of damage in ideal situations, if they are dual wielding. So we take 2 Fury Prot warriors in the raid, that's gonna be 1.2 total warriors worth of damage. A hunter in tier 1 is doing about 80% of a warrior's damage, which is pretty decent. Of course, after tier 1 they fall off a cliff, but right now they are pretty decent. That's another 0.8. For the sake of this video, I am not gonna count the healers because the best thing they can do is wand every so often at the boss, and that's not gonna be significant. You can think that if you want. Then we got a mage, which is 0.8 warriors. Then we got a warlock, which is once again 0.6 warriors. And we got 2 rogues. Rogues, once again, you can take them if you want. They are about 0.95% of a warrior. The best rogues in the game can beat almost every warrior, but not all of them. The top ones are still winning. You could even make an argument that they have the upper hand in the early tier 1, so that's also something you can look at. But overall, I will mark them as 0.95 of a warrior. It doesn't matter, you can mark them 98. It's not gonna move the numbers too much. But overall, out of these 7 non-warriors we got doing damage, we got a total of 5.3 warriors worth of damage. And now we gotta add 23 warriors, which of course we have 23 Fury warriors, so that means 23 more warriors. Duh. And the total raid damage is gonna be 28.3 warriors worth of damage. This is, of course, the bare minimum amount of non-warriors that you can take into a raid. This is the most stacked possible composition. Now let's imagine we take this quote-unquote perfect composition and we move into a more reasonable composition. This one right here, you have an entire new caster group in here. And now we got a 21 warrior composition, which of course is 19 DPS warriors. We are trading a total of 4 warriors like this group into 3 mages, which is 0.8 times 3. That is 2.4 warriors, and then we add up a warlock, which is 0.6, right? So in total we get 3 warriors worth of damage instead of 4. we are going from the equivalent of 28.3 warriors to 27.3 warriors. That's not a big deal. That is about 3.5% less damage in total for the raid. But remember that 3.5, because that 3.5 is actually gonna turn into something way bigger. Now let's imagine that you are a more casual guild, you're one of those new hippies, okay? And you are gonna do the unthinkable. Instead of taking 5 warrior groups, you're gonna take 4. And we are gonna use this new group to take a couple of friends that play crappier specs because they are my friends and we like them and I like raiding with my homies. You know, what is World of Warcraft without the homies? Say for example you take a Boomkin because why not? It's the meme raid. The best Boomkin can do about 40% of the damage of a warrior. But you might say, okay, wait. There is 3% crit for free to all the casters, Medina. How about the 3% crit is super broken, the Boomkin aura? Let us take a look at the composition once again. We're gonna take a Boomkin over here. We lost 1 warrior because that Boomkin is taking the space. The Boomkin is 40% of the damage, so that's a clean 0.6 warrior that you lost already, but 3% more crit for the casters. We got 4 mages and 2 warlocks. That's good, right? This is the way that you add up if a buff is worth it to take to the raid or not. We are gonna take the value of the buff for every player. So 3% crit, it is about the same as 3% more damage. For a warlock it is even less because the warlock cannot even crit with the dots, right? But for a mage it is about 3% damage. And now what we gotta do is multiply. 4 mages, 0.8 DPS of a warrior each, right? 4 mages, that is 0.8 warriors each, and then 2 warlocks, that is 0.6 each. That is an equivalent of 4.4 warriors. And what is the 3% of that? Well, that is exactly 0.132 warriors, or 13% of a single warrior worth of damage. So congratulations, the Boomkin went from being 40% of a warrior to 53% of a warrior. Where did the other 48% go? Are you coming home, daddy? So yes, if you can see that a meme class has a good buff and nobody wants to take it anyway, there is probably a mathematical reason for it. Another good example is, say for example, a feral druid. A feral druid can bring leader of the pack, which is 3% more crit, right? The problem with ferals is that their leader of the pack buff is only for the party. So at best, you can benefit only 3 warriors. Of course, a warrior is worth 1 warrior, so 3 warriors, you multiply it by 3%, that is 9%. So a feral druid can give you 9% of a warrior worth of damage from the buff alone. The best feral druids in the game, in ideal conditions, in the alliance only, can do about 70% of a warrior worth of damage. The best. So that means a feral druid is only % worth of a warrior in the best conditions, which never happen. Now of course, if leader of the pack was a global buff, if the entire raid got it, all of a sudden you got 22 melees, you multiply that by 3%, that is like a warrior and a half worth of damage in the buff alone. That's what would make a feral druid meta. If that buff was raid wide, it would actually be amazing. But it is not the case. You can do this math for any buff in the game and you can come up with a really good explanation to what some classes are taken and why some classes are not taken. Mark of the Wild is not a huge buff, but when you give it to every single member of the raid, that is actually a really big buff. That is why you always wanna take 1 druid. But what if you are a super greedy warrior, okay? You screw everybody else, screw the raid, I don't care if we lose damage, I wanna have 3% more crit in my group, so that way I can get a 99, I can beat all the warriors, I can do 3% more damage, that's gonna be awesome. Well, actually, think again, that's not how the game works anymore, and that's for a simple reason. Warriors have not 1 but 2 of the best DPS cooldowns in the game. That is gonna be in the screen right there. Death Wish, which is 20% more damage, and Recklessness, which is guaranteed crits. Death Wish is gonna last you 30 seconds and Recklessness is gonna last you 15 seconds. The thing you gotta remember is that this multiplies of each other, because if you're critting, your attacks do more damage, and if you multiply it by 20% more off of that, that is a multiplicative addition. It is kinda complicated to do the math of Recklessness because it depends on your gear, how much is a big deal. There is also a crit cap, but if you pop Death Wish and Recklessness, you're gonna have so much rage that you can just do Heroic Strike and you cannot glance, so the crit cap is is at about 90%. Now imagine you have good gear, you have like 40% crit, and you take recklessness and your effective crit rate is gonna be 85%, because your offhander can still glance, so we gotta take into account that. It is not a perfect number, it doesn't matter. Recklessness is 45% more damage. Once again, more damage means more rage, so that also means more damage indirectly, so this is not supposed to be an exact correlation, but 45% more damage, and you multiply it by 20%, because you get 20% from Death Wish. If you pop both of them at the same time, you get 75% more damage. And that is why you wanna pop all your cooldowns at the same time. All of a sudden, all your warriors are worth 1.75 warriors for a little bit. And that's a big deal because they only last for 15 seconds and 30 seconds respectively. So say that you kill a boss in 15 seconds, which some bosses you can kill in 15 seconds in a speedrunning guild, for example. Your 23 Fury Warriors are gonna be doing 75% extra damage, and your total raid damage goes from 28.3 total warriors equivalent to 45.55 warriors worth of damage. It's like your 40 man has 3 times the DPS is supposed to. And this very aspect is why stacking warriors is so important, because the faster you kill the boss, the higher the uptime, the higher the time your cooldowns are up compared to the time they are not in the fight, which means the higher the multiplier of all your warriors in the raid. The more warriors, the more damage, the faster the boss dies, the more cooldown uptime, which means more damage. In a 15-second fight, warriors are worth 1.75 warriors. In a 30-second fight, you have 15 seconds of recklessness and Death Wish, and then you have another 15 seconds of only Death Wish. And of course, Death Wish is 20% damage only, so in average, you average out the 20% and the 75%. In a 30-second fight, a warrior can enjoy a 1.47 multiplier, which is still insane because remember that the warrior is already the best DPS, and now they do 47% more. So we're gonna go back to our example. We got the perfect composition right here, and we go to a quote-unquote a meme composition where we take one group of crap specs, one group of casters, which we didn't have to take once again. We are gonna go from a baseline of 28.3 warriors worth of damage to an equivalent of 25.5 warriors worth of damage, and that is a 10% damage reduction. Now you might think 10%, that's not too bad. 10% damage, that's like what, 4 people in a raid? Okay, I can deal with that. I had 4 idiots in my raid before, but remember the math, because now we only have 15 warriors that can benefit from that sweet, insane 75% modifier. So in a 15-second fight, we go from 45.55 warriors worth of damage, which is absolutely bonkers insane, 3 times the damage you need, to 36.75 warriors worth of damage. And that is actually a 20% damage reduction. So all of a sudden, that 10% damage turned into 20% damage. That is the equivalent of losing 8 people in the raid. And that's not the worst part of this all, mind you, because that 15-second fight is gonna turn into an 18.75-second fight. And for those 3.75 seconds, you only have now 20% extra damage as a modifier. You look at this equation over here, I made it pretty neat. We take the damage of the warriors, we multiply them by their modifier and the amount of seconds they have it, and then we do the same for the other modifier, which is 20%, and then at the end we take the damage of the other raid and we multiply it by the amount of time the fight goes on. And that gives us a total of 35.1 warriors worth of damage. That means you lost another 1.6 warriors just for lengthening the fight, and that's not the worst again, because those 3.75 seconds where you are doing only 20% damage, they are gonna make those 3.75 seconds longer yet. Those 3.75 seconds are gonna turn into 5.4 seconds. So if we change the formula once again, that means we get 34.56 warriors worth of damage. So by losing 20% of our damage, we lost 2 warriors more on top of that. In other words, making the fight 3 seconds longer actually makes it 5.4 seconds longer. We go from that ideal perfect 45.55 warriors to an equivalent of 34.5, which is a 24.2% damage that's gone. And that's a single group that you sacrificed. And as you can imagine, the numbers get only worse the more longer the fight gets, the more you lose damage, the more you lose damage on the other side. Every warrior that you do not take is another warrior exponentially making every single other warrior in the raid weaker. In that way, losing one warrior is actually costing you more than one warrior. Every time a DPS warrior dies in the fight, that's the same as a warrior losing 2 to 5% of their damage. Every single one of them. Because in vanilla, warriors are worth more than the sum of their DPS, quite literally. And what you learned today, I hope, is that in a real fight, a small difference in damage will turn into a huge difference in damage when you add it up enough. And as long as this is the case, even if a Boomkin is 3% more crit, even if a rogue is almost as good as a warrior, the raid that stacks the warriors is gonna beat you by a lot every single time. And that's exactly why TBC is way better than vanilla. Vanilla classes are stupid, they make no sense. Why the hell would you do this? 80% of the players cannot play the class they want anymore. And subscribe, join the Discord, and thank you for watching.